right, I think we're ready. Hey everyone, my name is Derek and I am a Dildo-smith. I am the creator of Amavidi and I make dildos every day. I'm here to do the weekly AMA Ask Me Anything. This is Ask a Dildo-smith, where I answer your questions about all things relating to dildos, dildo making, or anything else that might come up. So, yeah. Let's see. Oh, I'm live. Okay, great. So, let's see. This week was actually really interesting. I've got a few things I want to bring up. But to start off with, kind of, hang on a second here. Let's see. I was getting some notes that there were some technical difficulties, but I'm not seeing it. So let's see. This week was actually really interesting. I've got a few things that I want to show off and talk about. Topic for tonight is going to be 3D printing. That's right. Tonight's topic is 3D printing for the aspiring dildo-smith. So we'll be talking about some different kinds of 3D printers, as well as some of the things to be looking out for if you're thinking about getting a 3D printer to make dildos. But I think, let's see, how did this week go? Actually, last week, if you have any, let's see, go back and watch some of the old videos. They're on YouTube. You can catch them. And they're actually a really good way of kind of catching up and keeping track of some of the things I've been up to. But last week's episode was specifically about me and my background and how I came to this. And if you go back to the previous episode and watch it, you'll see that it's kind of a long and circuitous journey. So one of the things that happened this week was actually we have a new Twitter handle. We're now using just Amavidi. That's it. Not Amavidi Studios. Although if you do tag Amavidi Studios, it redirects back to Amavidi. But Amavidi is our new Twitter handle, so you can use that going forward. We are also posting videos on TikTok, just trying it out. I mean, don't expect a whole lot, but go over there and jump in and, watch a few videos. Those are going to be, the trick with TikTok is that they don't like adult topics and they will censor them, shadow ban them, and everything like that. So it's going to be much more technical in the sense that it's going to be process oriented. We'll show like vacuuming and silicone, how it stretches and how we clean the cups and all of those things. It's a little bit more technical in that sense, but it's still very related. But we're gonna have to walk a fine line with TikTok because they are so censorship happy. The other thing that happened this week is that I fucked up. I totally screwed something up this week. I was working on a new design for a penetrable, and I mixed up some silicone, and I was going for a really soft silicone, and then I mixed it up, and I had extra. So I poured it into the mold, and then had extra, so I poured it into another mold. I thought I had enough to make a dough short, but I didn't. I actually only filled it up about 3/4 of the way, maybe 2/3, 3/4. I was like, wow, fuck, I got to figure out how to fill up this mold. So I went, grabbed some other silicone, mixed it up real quick, threw it into the mold, which I had done in the past, and it's kind of a different, you get some lines and you get some layering that happens, but it's one of those things that happens. But what I didn't realize was that they were so different. I knew that one of them was a super soft and the other one was a very firm silicone, A25 versus a 0020. And what I didn't realize was that they were so different and how they were going to interact. And so ended up pulling the penetrable out, and that was a mess unto itself. I totally screwed up that mold, but it was purely a first run prototype, which I totally expect to screw up the molds on those. So not a big deal, but still I lost the mold. The master is still good, but I lost the mold. But I noticed something different about it. And this is actually it. This is our dough short. Let me switch back to this camera. This is the dough short, and it's about 6 inches long. It's really good for G-spot or prostate play. But, you know, up here, this is really squishy. This is the 0020. But then right behind that, we start getting the gel 25, the A25, and it's firm, but the surface is still this squishy 0020. So I fucked up and managed to create dual density toys. I didn't create dual density toys. Somebody else has done that. Many people have done that in the past. But I screwed up and created something that is actually viable for me. I mean, look how much that tip squishes. And yeah, it just squishes like crazy. But then this part is much firmer compared to this part. So I guess the moral of the story here is that fuck-ups really don't, and this is something I'm having to learn. I'm a perfectionist. I don't like making mistakes, but sometimes those screw-ups that you do, those mistakes that you make, are actually what push you forward. And so this was the first example of it. And so I had to recreate it and see if I could even do it again in something a little bit different. So here we have a gibbolus. And again, this is a really squishy 0020 with a A25 core through here. You can kind of see down here where my thumbs are how much it squishes, but then it doesn't squish that much through the shaft. And so I was able to recreate it. I was able to do it again, and there were some things about it that I was like, okay, that's interesting. But that was, I screwed up, but then I was able to recreate it. And so now I can actually do that. We did another version. This is actually in 0030 over A25. So we have a somewhat firmer tip. Again, you can do a real good squish on that. But this, we're like really squishing on this. I cannot compress that anymore. If I come down here, I can really squish that net tip down. So yeah, I mean, it has a little bit more droop than I would like. I would like to see it kind of sit just a little bit more vertical. I say vertical, but I'd like to see it maintain that curve a little bit more. But it's viable. And I've said this before, and I hope that I'm not repeating myself too much. But the bottom line is that mistakes are okay. And I think one of the things I'm trying to get across here, and I'm not doing it very well because I keep reiterating this fact that mistakes are okay. But what I'm trying to get across is that don't wait until perfection to get started. It's totally okay to screw things up. And I will say that 9 times out of 10, you screw up and there's a lesson to be learned there. You'll learn it and you'll move on. The 10th time, the circumstances are going to be out of your control. So, you can't really feel too bad about making that mistake. Now, I think that kind of when I talk about making mistakes, I'm also talking about risk. And taking a risk is something that is hard to do, but you can do it in moderation and in such a way that you're not putting everything at risk. Take small risks, take little steps, and just move forward. So I think that as I talk about not letting perfectionism and not waiting for the perfect time to get started, I think what I'm trying to tell people is start before you're ready. And if you wait until you're ready, you never will be. So that was my story of fucking up this week. But I would be remiss if I never mentioned my website where you can find all of our toys and such. That would be www.amavidi.com. That's amavidi.com or amavidi.etsy.com. So I'm gonna see if I can bring up my presentation here because I'm going to be talking about 3D printers, and I think it would be good for me to be a little bit more structured. But let's see if I can get this to work. Oops, I forgot to check this. Let me double check and make sure. It does work. So let's do this. And hopefully you can still hear me. The mic says that it's working. So I'll assume that I am. All right. We're going to be talking about 3D printers. I might be doing something a little bit more specific for the aspiring Dildo-smith, but generally speaking, it's going to be pretty general across. I say general. It's going to be pretty applicable across the board. So yeah, I'll start off with saying this is not comprehensive. I misspelled that. Wow, I did this. I thought I proofread everything, but I didn't. It's a bit of an overview, and your specific use case will determine the best options for you. So don't take my word for gospel. Take it for what it's worth. Grain of sand, grain of salt, whatever floats your boat. So start off with, there are 2 main types of 3D printers. There's FDM, it's also called FFF. FDM, fused deposition modeling. FFF, fused filament fabrication. It turns out that there's some kind of a trademark, copyright/patent on fused deposition modeling. And it's about to expire, but the bottom line is that technically you can't use FDM, but FFF is completely usable. So there's FDM or SLA. SLA stands for Stereolithography, and there are a couple of subcategories in that, laser versus LCD. The vast majority of printers are going to be FDM/FFF. FDM usually offers the greatest value just in terms of the dollars that you spend versus what you can get out of it. I will say that look for community support when you're looking for a 3D printer. You would be amazed at how many problems you do actually come across, and that community is going to be there to support you. And while it may not be direct support, you will be able to learn an immense amount from the folks that have gone before you. And so if you're looking at a 3D printer, take a few minutes, kind of sidetrack out and start looking for communities around that printer, whether it's on Facebook or if the company has forums, and look to see how active it is. That way you can feel confident that you're going to have people around that can support you in the future. FDM, FFF, the materials are stored in rolls. So they come out in strings of filament. You can get a variety of materials: PLA, PETG, ABS, ASA. You don't have to know what any of these things mean. Just know that they exist. Something to keep in mind is that PLA is pretty much, I don't know how to put a percentage on this, but maybe 75% of the market in terms of filaments that you can find. PLA is super easy to print, and it's probably where you're going to want to start if you're using FDM. PETG is almost as easy. It has a I guess the thing to note is that each of these different filaments, PLA, PETG, ABS, ASA, all have different properties. And PLA is probably the most, fragile is not the right word, but it's approaching fragile. It's not fragile in the sense that you are going to break it if you drop it, but it's less durable. That's a really good word, durable, than say PETG or ABS. One of the things about PLA that makes it so nice is that it is really easy to print. It's really forgiving, and you can make a lot of mistakes and it will still print just fine. ABS, on the other hand, is very, very finicky, and it will require an enclosed printing area and temperature control. There are a lot of things that can go wrong with ABS, but there are some things about ABS that make it a good option when you're talking about especially dildo smithing or making 3D prints. One of the things about ABS is that it can be vapor smoothed, and this is kind of get into post-processing of 3D prints, which I'm not going to get into very deeply tonight, but I do want to mention it because ABS is something that is very easy to vapor smooth, in that it's not totally difficult. PLA, there is no chemical smoothing for it. And so PLA is going to be purely a mechanical smoothing process. So sanding, epoxies, then sanding again, buffing it out, things like that. ASA is kind of a new filament on the market. It is interesting because it prints almost as easily as PLA, but ASA can be chemically smoothed with, I think it's isopropyl alcohol. I can't quite remember, but it's new on the market. It's interesting. I don't have a whole lot of experience with it, but it's something I want to try out, so I'll mention it. There are many, many more kinds of materials that you can work with. Some of them are flexible, etc. I'm not going to get into all of them, but I do want to mention a few here. So this is kind of an example of, how a 3D printer works. The filament moves through the print head, and I think you can see my mouse here. It moves through the print head. It gets melted in here, and then it gets squished out the nozzle right here. And then the bed and head move around in order to position it properly. So it's if you ever think about, if you've ever seen somebody use a pastry bag, it's kind of the same idea. That's how FDM printing works. And you've seen people do pastry bags on a cake, and they spin the turntable, and they come up with some really pretty designs. But it's the same thing where you're squishing out a material onto another one that is moving. And so that gives you a sense of how that works. I don't know what printer that is. I'm curious though. But there are some things about here. Down here, this kind of brass part here is the nozzle. That's where the filament is coming out of. There are some parts up here. This is a heat break. This is an area where it kind of dissipates some heat, but it does all the melting right down here. There's a motor up here that pushes the filament down. But that's a little bit more technical. FDM, FFF printers have decent fidelity, but they do require substantial post-processing. And by post-processing, I'm talking about the fact that when the print comes off, it's going to have a texture to it. And I might just switch back to the camera here. This is actually a 3D print of, this is actually the base of the gibless. The bumps were all added after the fact. But if you look really close, like right in here, you can see those layer lines. And if you listen, maybe you can hear the texture as my fingernail runs across it. But it's built up. This one was printed this way. And so there are layers all along this way. And every one of those layers has just a little bit of a ridge to it. And so that has to be smoothed out in some way, whether it's sanding. Some people have used primer and sanding, and then primer, sanding, and then various spray paints, or there are a few different ways of doing it. I think one of the best ways is to use an epoxy that you can coat the 3D model with, and that'll give you a nice glossy surface. I've got a couple of examples here. I'm going to switch back. This is actually a variant of the Verseston, and this one has kind of a web pattern on it. This never went into production, but this one, you can't quite see it, but it has a lot of texture to it. This one has not gone through any post-processing. But this one, and you can kind of see right in through here, that glossiness. That has to do with the post-processing that was done on this one. And so this one now has, and it's, there you can go. You can see that same texture, but it's glossy. And so we've gotten rid of all of the layer lines that were on it. So all FDM prints are going to require some sort of post-processing. Keep in mind that your mold, the thing that you actually pour your final product into, can never be any better than your master model. So you're going to do all of your work on your master before you make your mold of it. These are some of the manufacturers and models that I think deserve some attention. Personally, I think Prusa and Creality are going to be the best bets. Prusa has their Mark III S Plus. One of the great things about Prusa is that it works And that's kind of just what I have to say is it works every time, every print. I can't remember the last time I had a failed print. And that's one of the things that's really going to slow you down when it comes to 3D printing these masters. The Mark III's is their standard model. It's going to run you about $750 or so in a kit form. About $1,000 if you want it completely built and sent you ready to print. They do have their mini. The only reason I'm mentioning the mini is that if all you want to do is print smaller things, and when I say smaller, I'm talking about maximum of maybe 4 or 5 inches tall, then the mini is a great option. It's $379. Really quick. And it is, I don't personally have any experience with it, but everything that I've seen about it is that it is just as bulletproof as the Mark III's Plus. Creality, I will say that I don't have a whole lot of experience with Creality, but I know a lot of people who do, and a lot of people swear by them. I think that one of the things about Creality, everything I've heard is that they tend to be a little bit finicky, and that you might have more of a chance of failed prints, but some people swear by them. The price on them is awesome. I will say that for the price of a Mark III's Plus from Prusa, you could pick up almost 2 of the Crealities, and so that may have an impact on your choices as well. Over here on the right, I've got a list of all the other 3D printer makers. This is actually not even a complete list. This is just one from a company that I buy some of my filament from, which is matterhackers.com, by the way. I have a note over here. Make sure the printer you buy will accommodate your 3D models. The Prusa works great for me because I'm not doing large prints. My largest print is about 8 inches tall, and the max build height on the Prusa is about 8, maybe 9 inches. It's somewhere between 8 and 9 inches. I think it's 8.25 inches. And so it works fine for me because I can just build it straight up on the print bed and it works great. If you're doing larger prints, then you'll probably want to look at the Creality, the Prusa. They don't have a model big enough to do large prints that would be, say, more than 9 inches tall. If you're looking for something that will print something more of an equine style or a tentacle or something that has a lot of length to it, then the Creality might be a better option for you. At the end here, I'm going to go back and pull up some websites so that you can see some of the prices. But the Crealities start at, I think, $300 and go up from there to maybe $600. So they're not that expensive. Now, the other option is SLA, and stereolithography, SLA, will always have a higher print resolution than FDM. And it's because of the way that it builds up the models. And in general, you're going to be looking at about 1/10 of a millimeter in layer heights for FDM. For SLA, it's going to be about 1/4 of that size. So for every layer that you would have on an FDM printer, you would have 4 layers on SLA. And those extra layers will give you a much smoother surface to work with. Now, before I go too far, I have to mention that SLA resin can be an irritant or toxic. Make sure that your family, kids, pets are not exposed to the resin. The best thing to do would be to keep them out of the room when the SLA printer is printing. It's not it's not going to kill you. I say that. I don't want to make guarantees here, but it is an irritant. Kind of like ammonia can be an irritant. And so that's something to keep in mind. You want to have a room, an area that you can designate just for an SLA printer so that you can make sure that none of your pets are going to be exposed to any of the fumes or anything. Now, SLA printing splits again into two different technologies. One is laser based and one is UV LCD. One of the things about SLA printing is they generally have a smaller print volume. Print volume is the physical space that it can print into. And so with that smaller print volume, you tend to be limited in terms of what you're going to be able to print in there. Now, there are laser-based printers, which I'm running a video here of Formlabs. They're Form 3. Actually, this is their Form 1. They're up to the Form 3 now, but this is just a video I found. This is a laser-based printer, and so there is a laser underneath that print bed that shoots up into the bottom, which allows it to cure the resin. You can see that clear area. That's where the laser shoots up into. And there's some video of them doing some 3D modeling, filling it up with the liquid resin, and there you can see the laser firing. So what it does is it fires a laser, tracing out that one layer, and then the bed drops away, separates, and then it prints the next layer. So layer by layer, it builds up. You get some really pretty prints out of it and really high resolution. They are quite expensive. I think the least expensive one I can think of is the Peel Poly. They've got a new model out. I can't remember. I'll come to that in a minute. Peel Poly has one for about $2,000. Formlabs is going to be about $3,500 or so to get in. The laser-based printers are slower, and they often have higher resin costs. The other one is down here. I've got a video of, I think this is Elegoo. Yeah, this is Elegoo and their Mars printer. So it's UV LCD. And what there is there's that same clear base, but underneath it, instead of having a laser, it has a UV light source and an LCD screen. Actually, it's the same LCD screen that's on your phone, but it allows it to shoot UV light up through the bottom, but the LCD blocks out, acts as a filter for certain areas. And so the areas that it lets through cure while the blocked areas don't. And so you can create kind of, if you've ever done screen printing, it's very similar to that. It's the UV LCDs. One of the nice things about them is that they are faster. They generally have higher maintenance costs. The resin costs can be a little bit lower though. So there are trade-offs. The UV LCD printers, you're going to be starting at $400 or $500 and go up from there. So let's see, what else do I have here? This is a kind of a different view. This is the SLA laser version. Down here at number 5, that's the laser source. It bounces around and it shoots up into the bottom of this vat, which has liquid resin in it. And it prints onto this print head up here, which is number 4. So the beam starts here, shoots out, bounces off this mirror, and then cures the resin on the surface of this vat right here. So SLA printer manufacturers and models, the laser version, Formlabs and Peel Poly are going to be your main culprits on the laser side. Formlabs, they are expensive. Their base model is $3,500. They're virtually bulletproof though. Their print software is awesome. They will basically keep you from printing something that can't be printed. Poly is a little bit more affordable. I think their entry model comes in at around $1,400, maybe $1,900. I can't quite remember off the top of my head. But their software isn't as good, but if you're willing to tinker with it and make some mistakes, it'll get you some really nice prints. Actually, my original Metropole, the original Metropole Master, was printed on a Peel Poly Moai, one of their first models. I think I paid $1,700 for that printer, and that was a really good entry into understanding how 3D printers, resin 3D printers work. On the UV LCD side, Elegoo, they have their Mars. Anycubic has their Photon. Those are really good options. And again, just make sure that the printer you buy will accommodate your 3D models. So if you're doing something that's over a certain size, then make sure that your printer can handle it. This is kind of an example of a difference between FDM and SLA. The FDM is on the left, and you can see these print lines down here. These curved surfaces are really, really hard for FDM to do well. The SLA prints are pretty awesome. They do a great job with organic shapes, really nice job with organic shapes. So if you're into something that is more organic looking, less structural, then SLA is a great way to go. But FDM, if you were to go back and do some post-processing on this, you could end up with a product that ends up looking as good as the FDM. So I don't have a good, let me see if I can get back to that. I thought I had more to go on that, but I guess not. Didn't I have a closing? Yes, I did. Let me make sure that I can get back to that. Bring that back up. All right. Places to go learn some more. YouTube is awesome. Thomas Sandlatterer. I'm totally butchering that name. He's a extremely knowledgeable source for all things 3D printing. Oh, I forgot another. Maker's Muse. There's another one that I should have put on here, but I didn't. Maker's Muse is an awesome, really awesome YouTube source. That he's from Australia, but he does a really good job of talking about 3D printers, 3D printing. And he does a really good job of explaining the differences, the pros and cons of each printer. He does a lot of printer reviews. So there's also CNC Kitchen, 3D Printing Nerd. They are really good sources as well. Facebook, just search for 3D printing or your particular model and manufacturer. I know that I keep going back to the community support, but you know, it's really hard to have kind of one-on-one support from a company when there are so many variables. And the folks that are in these these Facebook groups focusing on 3D printing, they are incredibly knowledgeable. And so they're a really good resource. Whoops. I clicked on the wrong button there. All right. So as we've been going along, George has been throwing links into the chat. So you may be able to go back through and catch some of those. One of the things I wanted to do here was also talk about and kind of give some examples of different 3D printers, their prices and things like that. I'll have to give me a moment here while I switch to a different web browser. And there we go. Oops. So were there any questions up to this point? All right. So let me double check here before I go into all of that. Ooh, question from Size Queen. How do any resins inhibit silicone cure? Yes, I forgot to mention this. I have, again, I kind of glossed over the post-processing. I didn't even mention it on the resin side, but the resins are cured by UV light, and so they have to be exposed to UV light after the print is complete in order to fully cure the surface. I have had occasions where the resin inhibits the cure of silicone when I'm making my molds. I wish I had a really good answer for you in terms of which, but what I have found is that certain resins tend to be more problematic than others. I had a gray resin from PO Poly that caused cure inhibition a lot. I switched over to their fluorescent and had zero problems. So if you're having problems with cure inhibition, switch to a different resin, and you might have to go through a couple, but I think you'll find one that doesn't cause cure inhibition, which is compatible with your printer and gives you the properties that you want. So yeah, actually, it's a really good question. I'm actually pleased that there was somebody out there who has had that experience, because I had forgotten about it. But yes, I did have problems with cure inhibition. Okay, do you 3D print any of your molds for pouring? No, I don't. I 3D print my masters, do my post-processing, and then make my molds from those. For me, the problem with 3D printing molds is that how do you do post-processing on something that is inside the block? It's hard to get in there and to sand and to do any post-processing. So basically, once you have a print, that is what you're going to get out of that print. I say that, I do know, I don't know. I believe I have seen videos of Kenton from Funkit, and their models are created from 3D molds. I'm sorry, 3D printed molds. I think they're using ABS and using a post-processing polishing process, vapor polishing process afterward. And if they can make it work, that's awesome. But for me and for my designs, it's not really an option. What's the sanding or whatever method is used to smooth out the printed model? What is the sanding process like for the printed model? Use, if you're printing on PLA, use 220 grit sandpaper, and you can get a decent surface. You can get rid of all the print lines, but you're going to have to follow up with something after that, whether it's a primer or a resin coating. Use a resin coating, then you can get a nice polished surface out of it. But yeah, start off with 220 and sand it fairly smooth, coat it with resin, then go back and If there are any problem areas, sand those again and buff them or coat it with resin again. You kind of get into a loop there. You kind of have to decide at what point is good enough. Do you have any resin experience with resin printing versus filament printing? And if so, which do you prefer for printing toy models? Yes, I've used both. My original Metropole was printed with PO Polymer Y, which was the resin printer. The Gibbous was printed on the Prusa. The Versustin was printed on the Prusa. The original Twist and Unicorn Horn were printed on the PO Polymer Y. So yeah, I've used both of them. I love the surface that you get from resin printing, and it requires such little follow-up post-processing, but I like the I want to say consistency, but the predictability of filament printing. Filament printing is very predictable, and so you're going to have fewer losses, failed prints, if you're doing FDM filament printing. The links that George is throwing up in there, I'm going to kind of look back over them. These are just links. They're not necessarily an interesting way for me to jump out and get in touch with the community. And so, you know, I don't have a horse in the race. So they're just links that I found, and maybe they'll be a good jumping off point for you. All right. Comment from Arc Welder. Post-processing to FDM G-code generation can smooth out curves. Yes. Kind of getting into the conversation, which is the equipment. Then the other side of the conversation is the software, which tells the equipment what to do. And you're right. The G-code is the actual instructions that go to the printer. There are what's called slicer software that tells, there's software that creates the code, which tells the motions that the 3D printer is supposed to use. There are different slicers that you can use, which have ways of tweaking the parameters so that you can get better prints. There's often a trade-off, whether it's speed or layers or things like that, but there are ways of tweaking the inputs so that your output is good and you can get some nice smooth curves. So yeah, actually really good comment. Was there anything else? George, you'll have to let me know if I missed anything. Okay. This was from Grace84. I think it's Grace. How long does it take to print XYZ? Some examples. What are different kinds of filaments, and do they print faster or slower? Okay. Are different filaments better suited for different shapes or sizes? Okay. How does a 3D printer impact your energy bill? Okay. This is approximately 7¼ inches tall, and this will take probably, for the resolution that I printed at, it'll probably take about 6 to 8 hours. I can't quite remember, but I think it was about 8 hours to print this particular model. Again, this is about 7 inches tall. The rough estimation I would use is that it's about an hour per inch. So if you're just trying to guesstimate time, then that's a decent way of doing it. The actual volume that you're printing So the size of each layer, you know, if this were this wide, then it would take probably twice as long. But for something that is generally a fairly basic design, and this is probably about 1.25 inches, 1.125 to 1.25 inches across at the head. It's about 3 inches across at the base. About an inch or so, just over an inch this direction. For me, this takes about 1 inch per hour. So this would be about 7 or 8 hour print. On SLA, you're looking at 14 to 20 hours. It's about twice as long. I say that. On my PO Polymer Y, I think the original Metropole took about 16 hours to print. So it's a decent time investment, but you kind of only have to make it a few times. And it's also set it and forget it. So different kinds of filaments. I kind of mentioned that. There's PLA, ABS are probably your dominant materials. PLA is actually really easy to print. ABS is kind of tricky. There are some new ones coming along like ASA that are probably, they're interesting to me because they can be vapor smoothed. I say vapor smoothed. If you do a 3D print and you put it in a chamber and you vaporize isopropyl alcohol, it will chemically react with the surface and it melts it very, very slightly. And it only melts the very surface of it. But then the alcohol evaporates off and you're left with something that has a nice glossy surface like this. You can kind of see the gloss on that. But how does a 3D printer impact your energy bill? Negligible. I think I'm trying to remember what the wattage is on it. It's not much. It's less than running a space heater, which I think a space heater is going to run you $1 a day. And again, it's only for the time that it's printing. So, and this is a FDM. FDM, since it uses heat, it uses more energy. The SLA printers, almost no energy draw on those. All right. I think I caught up on questions there. Oh, Ilurius, would it be possible to get a video of your process and making them? Speaking of the modeling, I might have to do kind of a long form live stream of that. I think that's kind of the best way that I'm gonna have to do that, because I use the software I use on the tablet and things like that. I think it's best to do that in kind of a long form as opposed to just a 15, 30 second, 60 second kind of short video. So I might do that in the future. Actually, if you go to our TikTok, which I'm going to pull up real quick, see if I can do this. Switch to that one. There we go. So this is one where we're doing some vacuuming. It's actually a really cool process. You can see the silicone getting vacuumed out and 3 different colors that we're going to do in this pour. And actually, this is how the toy gets poured. And in this case, we're doing a Dewy Skies in a Metropole. And we end up with a really pretty design. This is how we do our we do butt art on all of our toys, which is just a nice touch for us to kind of put a little bit of a fingerprint, a thumbprint on that particular piece, and it kind of creates a fingerprint, is that every piece of butt art is unique. So in terms of doing a video on the process of modeling, think about it. It's a little bit daunting because I'm not all that great at doing 3D modeling, so it takes me a long time. All right. Anything? I think that's all the questions. I'm just going to pull up the web browser again one more time, and I think I have some websites pulled up. All right. So we'll start off with Prusa. Again, this is kind of my go-to. It has the perfect build volume for me because I'm not doing large toys. It's about $750 USD. If you're in Canada, it's more. If you're in the rest of the world, you can do your own currency conversions. One of the things I like about Prusa is that from almost anytime, once you buy it, you're into their ecosystem. And one of the great things is that, when the Mark III came out, well, they eventually came out with the Mark III's. And what they did was they posted the 3D models for all of the parts that had to be printed to create a Mark III's. And then the Mark III's Plus came out and they did the same thing. So they do a really good job of allowing you to keep current with the current model just by printing your own parts. So that's kind of nice. This is Creality. I'm just kind of gonna, I don't have a whole lot of experience with them. I will say, you're starting at about $200 here and you're going up to about $600 here, but they've got so many different models within the range that you can jump into, and it's just kind of your choice as to how big. If you're wanting to do something that has a lot of length to it, then the 3 Max, the Ender 3 Max has a print volume. I think it's 340 millimeters high, which, if my math is correct, is about 17 inches. I think that's about 16 or 17 inches in height. So that will cover just about anything. If you're looking for more than that, then, well, more power to you. These are just some PLA printed filaments. Again, I'm just jumping on Amazon to look. PLA filaments are pretty inexpensive, $25, $30, something in there. I will say that Prusa, again, I'm kind of a Prusa fanboy, so take it for what it's worth. They have their Prusament, and it is a really nice PLA filament, and it's not exactly cheap. It's $30, so it's not the cheap end, but it prints so nicely. It's just so easy to use, and it's really consistent. So I love Prusa. Getting into the SLA printers, the resin printers, we have Anycubic, their Photon series. If you're just looking for something small, say something like a plug or maybe miniatures, if you're into gaming, if you're making miniatures, the Anycubic Photon is awesome. Is a really great print resolution for the price. I mean, $500. It's kind of incredible. Their Mono series, their Mono X, is about $900, and you're looking at just shy of 12 inches in terms of build height. So it's a pretty good point to jump in. The Phenom by Poly is kind of their entry level. It's about $2,000. Then they have their Noir and their L, and you're going up to $3,300 on the Phenom Noir. Formlabs. Boy, I have a love-hate relationship with Formlabs. Their printers are awesome. They start at $3,500. Their large version is just over $10,000. So they're beautiful prints. They're so consistent. They're really nice to use, but they're expensive to get into. And they have made the choice to start selling their resin in these cartridges. And they're fairly expensive. Their basic resin here is $150, and then they go up to $250 from there. Generally, for a liter of resin, for say the Anycubic or the Phenom from Pio Poly, those are closer to $75 a liter. And so, you're going to pay twice as much for the Formlabs resin. Also, they have built their system in such a way that it only works with these cartridges. And so when you can't drop another cartridge in there. You can't use a different a different resin with these printers. You have to use the Formlabs resin. Again, you're going to get really consistent prints, but they're going to be fairly expensive. Anycubic and Pio Poly, you can get generic resins for those, and again, about $75 a liter. So that is everything that I had prepared. So what was my very first printer? My very first printer was the Pio Poly Moai resin printer. It had the right build volume for what I was doing at the time, and it had the resolution that I wanted, but it was a little bit finicky in terms of trying to get good prints out of it. I had probably about a 50 to 60% success rate. So, I expected to have failed prints about a third of the time. And I made the switch to Prusa after that because Prusa they're so consistent. All right. Were there any other questions, George? Was there anything else here? I think that's about it. Question from Size Queen: Pio Poly fluorescence. I used a fluorescent. My pronunciation may be a little bit sloppy. I get going sometimes, and anyway. But I used a fluorescent green resin from Pio Poly with my Pio Poly Moai, and had really good results with that. Their gray resin did cause cure inhibition, but the fluorescent green resin did not. So that may be what we're talking about there. All right. I've been going on for about an hour. So if there's nothing else, I'm going to wrap it up. I will mention that we do have a Patreon. If you're interested in learning more about the dual density toys, this month I'm going to be sending out dual density examples to all the patrons. So if you're interested in getting kind of in at the ground floor, so to speak, on the dual density toys, then jump over to Patreon, and I think George is going to put a link in there for me. Patreon.com/Amavidi, and for, I think it's, well, we're doing $40. $40 will get you into the Flourish level, and that is where we will send you a toy every month, and it will usually be something that hasn't been released, something that is pre-release, not quite prototype, so it's not like early prototypes, but they're refined prototypes that you might call beta testing, and that might not even be the right way. Gamma testing, because it's beyond beta testing, but it's not quite released yet, so it's that middle ground. Pre-release, that's a really good way of putting it. So the Flourish level gets you in at $40 and will get you a toy every month. There's a international version, and that's $60, and the difference there is just purely because of the difference in postage. So, all right, I think I'm kind of talked out for the evening, but thank you everybody for joining me, and we will do this again next week. Thanks everybody. Bye.